All right, let's dive right into this. Today's explainer is tackling one of the absolute most fascinating transformation stories in the modern tech landscape. We are calling it the Palantir puzzle. Now, for years, Palantir has basically been the ultimate tech outlier. I mean, they are not your typical quirky Silicon Valley startup. They really built their entire reputation operating deep in the trenches of government intelligence, dealing with literally some of the most sensitive, high-stakes data on the planet. We're talking CIA-level classified operations here. But, as we're going to see, succeeding in that highly classified, secretive world is an entirely different game than dominating the corporate boardroom.
And that brings us to the core, really high-stakes challenge of our explainer today. Can a secretive giant actually scale? We're calling this the Palantir commercialization challenge. Think about it. It is one thing to build a highly complex, virtually impenetrable data platform to track global threats. It is a completely different beast to take that bespoke, heavy-duty architecture and magically turn it into a scalable, repeatable commercial business model. The kind of model that a standard, everyday corporation can just buy and use right off the shelf.
To really wrap our heads around how incredibly tough this pivot is, just look at a company like Salesforce. They absolutely conquered the cloud by literally campaigning with a no software slogan. Their whole goal was to make enterprise tools as easy as just browsing the web. Contrast that with Palantir's origins. They started by building high-complexity, incredibly dense platforms, like Foundry and Gotham, specifically designed for national security. It's a wildly unusual, almost paradoxical starting point for a company that is now trying to become an off-the-shelf commercial powerhouse.
So moving into Chapter 1, the bespoke trap. When you are building software to track global threats, you definitely don't just hand over a login and a password, right? You build highly customized, one-of-a-kind solutions. But in the commercial business world, creating completely customized software for every single client you sign, that's a massive trap. It acts like a giant anchor, severely limiting how fast you can actually grow.
Now, early on, Palantir managed this trap in a very unique way. They didn't just sell you software, they practically provided a white glove service. They relied heavily on what they called forward-deployed engineers. Picture this: elite, highly trained tech teams sent to literally live at a client's office. They essentially moved in with them. Their entire job was to manually build, configure, and integrate bespoke data solutions right there on site. And while that is incredibly powerful, relying on an army of brilliant engineers for every single new client is phenomenally expensive to maintain.
And naturally, this creates massive friction when you try to scale up. Compare Palantir's high-touch, forward-deployed engineer model to standard SaaS giants out there, like Atlassian. Atlassian relies on product-led growth. Their software scales without massive human intervention or, honestly, even traditional sales teams. Customers just sign up, download, and go. Palantir's bespoke origins are in direct conflict with this hands-off, highly profitable scaling model. To survive commercially, they have to figure out how to make their tools intuitive enough for a standard corporate IT guy to just use, without a Palantir genius standing over his shoulder.
Which brings us to Chapter 2, the digital capability gap. You might be wondering, if Palantir's software is so notoriously complex and requires so much hand-holding, why on earth would massive commercial corporations desperately want it anyway? Well, the answer lies in a widespread operational crisis that is absolutely paralyzing legacy companies today.
These companies are suffering from the digital capability gap. This happens when legacy organizations struggle with heavily fragmented data. Over decades, these companies have bolted together dozens of different software systems that, frankly, simply refuse to talk to each other. This fragmentation creates a massive blind spot, absolutely preventing leadership from seeing the full picture of their operations. They are literally drowning in disconnected data.
And we've seen some high-profile casualties fall right into this very gap. Consider massive legacy organizations like Marks & Spencer or Sears. These are prime examples of giant companies that really struggled to maintain a unified operational view. Just think about it. If your supply chain data doesn't talk to your inventory data, and your inventory data is playing hide-and-seek with your sales data, you don't just fall behind, you go extinct. Companies are desperate for a powerful solution to bridge this gap, and that is the exact void Palantir is swooping in to fill.
Enter Palantir's incredibly ambitious solution, enterprise automation. Palantir doesn't just want to be another analytics dashboard where executives look at pretty bar charts. No way. They are positioning themselves to become the overarching operating system for the modern enterprise. They want to be the central nervous system that brings all that fragmented data together, allowing a company to actually automate its most complex, chaotic operations.
To really understand this strategy, Look at the powerhouse that is ServiceNow. ServiceNow generates immense market power through their workflow strategy. They automate the actual manual processes and tasks within a company. Palantir is chasing that exact same level of market dominance, but through a totally different lens: data. Their goal is integrating wildly disparate data sets into a single, undeniable source of truth. Both companies aim to be the indispensable backbone of a business. They're just attacking the problem from different angles.
Chapter 3: Scaling versus Customization. This is the core strategic conflict of our explainer. How exactly do you take a system originally designed to solve the most complex, bespoke problems in the world for intelligence agencies and box it up to be plug-and-play for, say, a Midwestern retail chain? The competitive landscape highlights this tension perfectly. On one side, you have SAP, tackling complex enterprise change by leaning into heavy, expensive customization. On the totally opposite extreme, Snowflake won the data cloud market through a strategy of extreme simplicity and consumption pricing, meaning you only pay for exactly what you use. Palantir is trying to carefully thread the needle between the two. They need to adopt Snowflake's standardized modules and simple pricing, but without losing their ultimate superpower: handling the world's most complex, customized data problems. And look, we have to acknowledge the harsh reality on the ground here. Famously learned from the SAP transformation case, enterprise software change is never simple. Shifting a massive corporation's software deployment and pricing model is a monumental, painful task. For Palantir, they're essentially trying to rewrite their own corporate DNA on the fly, changing how they price, package, and deploy their technology. That level of change absolutely guarantees intense growing pains.
So let's talk about Chapter 4, the talent and culture factor. Because at the end of the day, scaling a massive tech giant isn't just about rewriting software code. It is fundamentally about the human element and the intense culture shock required to execute this massive organizational pivot. This poses a really critical internal question. How do you maintain employee engagement during a massive strategic pivot? If we look at historic case studies from companies like Meta and Nokia, we see how incredibly challenging it is to shift a company's core mission without losing your best people. Palantir's workforce was built on elite engineers tackling secretive, bespoke government challenges. Suddenly telling those exact same engineers to pivot to building standardized off-the-shelf commercial software? That requires a massive, delicate shift in leadership and internal culture.
Aligning their talent with this new reality is basically everything. As we saw in the Accenture workforce transformation case, your skills strategy determines your growth limit. Palantir has to aggressively transition its elite workforce from an old model that prioritized secretive complexity to a new market demand that strictly values speed and usability. It's a fundamental rewiring of what their engineering culture even defines as success.
And that brings us to Chapter 5, the ultimate commercial test. All of these grueling shifts, escaping the bespoke trap, standardizing product modules, rewriting corporate culture, they all lead right up to this singular, climactic test for Palantir's commercial dominance.
And that ultimate test can be summarized by this one number: 500, as in the Fortune 500. Palantir's ultimate goal is to bridge the gap from elite government contractor to everyday commercial necessity. To do that, their platform absolutely must seamlessly meet the needs of a typical Fortune 500 company. Because if they can capture this market, they don't just sell software anymore. They literally become the baseline digital infrastructure of the global economy.
But here is the hard-hitting takeaway you should definitely keep in mind. Technical superiority means absolutely nothing if the business model isn't usable by standard corporate teams. The entire commercialization challenge rests entirely on their ability to translate the incredibly complex into the highly usable. If a standard enterprise IT team can't deploy it without a SWAT team of Palantir engineers holding their hand, this whole commercial empire will stall out.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to chew on. Can a company built fundamentally on secrecy and highly bespoke complexity ever truly seamlessly succeed in the open, plug-and-play commercial market? It's a fascinating pivot and a real masterclass in SaaS strategy that the entire tech world is watching closely. So the next time you see a highly specialized tech firm trying to go mainstream, ask yourself, are they stuck in the bespoke trap? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.